everyone, and welcome to Timeless with Julie Hartman Live. I'm Julie Hartman. It is great, as always, to be with you. It is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and as a reminder, you can watch Timeless with Julie Hartman Live every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, and my show with Dennis Prager, aptly called Dennis and Julie, is on Sundays at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, and on my YouTube channel, I post what's called these Julie Noted news videos, where I will pick segments from the live show and pull them out if they are noteworthy, so they're shorter and more consumable if you don't have time to watch the entire live show. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman, and as always, you can email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. Now, I hope that every episode of Timeless is special, but today is an especially special episode because I have an in-studio guest, and that in-studio guest is none other than the sage, Larry Elder. Larry, welcome back to Timeless.
Julie, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for not calling me the black face of white supremacy. White supremacy.
I know, like Erica Smith. Yeah. I was going to bring
that
up.
Erica D. Smith, the LA Times columnist. Yes.
I love the way that you have seized that and reminded people of it, because that is one that should not have been let go.
Well, you know, they came out during the campaign for governor, as I point out in my book. And when the campaign was over, I came back here at Salem to finish out my contract. And I invited her on the show to talk to me about why I'm the black face of white supremacy. And not too surprisingly, she refused to come on.
Yes, I know from your book that, that you have invited a lot of people on your show.
Over the years, Maxine Waters, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharp, and Louis Farrakhan. Maxine Waters was kind of interesting because I used to be at KABC. And in those days, they programmed kind of fair and balanced, or so they thought. And Gloria Allred, the feminist lawyer, had a show on after mine. And Gloria and I are friends, even though we don't agree on virtually anything. And Gloria had Maxine Waters on as a pretty frequent guest. And I said, Gloria, do me a favor. The next time Maxine Waters comes on your show, would you ask her why she won't come on mine? Because I've asked her many times, she won't come on. Gloria said, yeah, I'll do that, and did. And so I was driving when it happened. And Gloria said, Maxine, my colleague Larry Elder here keeps saying that you won't come on this show. Can I just ask you why you won't come on this show? And she said, well, you know, Gloria, I don't go on shows of entertainers. Larry's nothing but an entertainer. Gloria, you're a serious journalist. I go on your show, but I just don't want to waste my time with entertainers. So Gloria already is a serious journalist, but I'm an entertainer.
Nice cop-out.
Yeah.
Not surprising. Well, for those of you who don't know who Larry Elder is, do you live under a rock? I mean, seriously. But just in case you don't, Larry has worn many hats in his life. He's been an attorney, a best-selling author, a nationally syndicated talk radio host, a nationally syndicated columnist. He's been the host of 2 nationally syndicated TV shows. See, it's great. I'm just reading aloud your resume, and I have you right here to cut in and go, wait a minute.
There it is.
You left this great accomplishment out.
So far, all true.
I know that you have a picture up at the Reagan Library, among other things. He also has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which I myself have seen. I have not stepped on it, however.
Corner of Hollywood and Vine, southeast corner of Hollywood and Vine. Can you believe it?
I can, but probably a lot of people can. Larry also ran for president of the United States, as many of you probably know. We will certainly be discussing what happened with that with regard to the RNC. And of course, in 2021, Larry ran in the recall election right here in his home state and my home state of California against Governor Gavin Newsom. That was the second gubernatorial recall race in California's history. And so, among other things today, we're going to be discussing that race. And Larry talks about it in his new book, released a few months ago, called As Goes California, My Mission to Rescue the Golden State and Save the Nation. I told Larry before the show that I read this cover to cover, so you can quiz me on the various parts and chapters. And what I love about this book is that it's not just about your 7.5-week gubernatorial race, but it's also about you and your life. So we will definitely be discussing that. But before we get into it, I want to publicize another book that you are in.
You and I are in this.
I know. Yes. I'm in this book too. I'm so honored to be in this book. It's called Elevator Pitches for God. It just came out recently, and you can order it on Amazon. You can also go on ep4g, and that's the number 4, ep4g.com, and order it there. And it's an independently published book. And it has 70 people who write 500-word essays, just a page long, about why they believe in God. And in fact, some of the people in this book, many people in the book struggle with God, but there are some people in this book who actually don't believe in God. But nevertheless, they write about why God is so necessary. And the amount of people in this book, the writer of Friends is an author in this book. There's a chemist, a physicist, senators, Silicon Valley CEO, Alan Dershowitz is in it. Seth Dillon, who's the CEO of the Babylon Bee, is also in the book. So I really recommend it. It is a fantastic book. And I promise I'm not just saying it because we're in it. It's called Elevator Pitches for God. So let's start by discussing this book here. You begin the book with a fascinating and revelatory interaction that you had in a restaurant in the west side of LA after the gubernatorial race. Can you tell us about that encounter?
Yeah, the race is over, and so I go to the west side of LA to meet a buddy of mine for dinner. He's late. So I'm sitting there. There's a table next to me with 2 ladies, and I think they feel sorry for me. So they start talking to me. And turns out they're 85 years old. One of them is celebrating her 85th birthday. They've known each other since the 2nd grade. They said they were Jewish. One said she was a human rights activist or advocate. The other one said she was a psychotherapist. And then about maybe 15 minutes into the conversation, Julie, one of them stops and says, "Wait a minute. I know you. You ran for, you're that Larry Elder." And she, big smile, and she said, "Guess who we voted for?" I said, "You didn't vote for me." She said, "How do you know that?" I said, "Well, let's see. We're in the west side of LA. You're both Jewish. One of you is a human rights activist." I said, "It doesn't take Columbo to put that together. You didn't vote for me." And they said, "You're right, we didn't." And I said, "Well, let me ask you something. How do you feel about the crime going on in the city?" And they both said it was outrageous. They knew a couple of people who had been victimized. "How do you feel about the fact that people are leaving California for the first time in the state's 170-year history? We've lost 1 million people in the last 3 years." And they both said they had friends who went to other places because they couldn't afford the cost of living. "How do you feel about the homeless problem we have here in California, which is the most egregious of any of the states?" And they said even in their neighborhoods now, not very far from where they live, there's homeless encampments. "How do you feel about the cost of living?" They had people who were struggled to buying a house. The average price of a house here in California is twice the national average. And I said, "How do you feel about the way Gavin Newsom shut down the state in a more severe way than anybody else did, the other 49 states?" And they both said they knew business people who lost their businesses because of the way Gavin Newsom shut down the state in a way that the business people did not think should be shut down. I said, "So here we are completing each other's sentences, but you wouldn't vote for me." I said, "Have you ever had a conversation with a conservative Republican before?" And they looked at each other and they said, "No." And then one of them said, "What are you drinking?" I said, "Double vodka, splash of cranberry." "What are you eating?" I said, "Well, I wasn't going to have a steak. Now I'm going to upgrade it to lobster." So they bought my drinks. They bought my meal. And I also, and later on in the book, as you know, talk about a similar instance when I've got some back issues, which is why I take Relief Factor. That's not a plug. It's true. I take it. And a buddy of mine recommended a massage therapist. And so gave me her address. And so I'm driving to find the place. And I turned down a residential street. I thought it was going to be an office building. And so I go up to the house. I knock on the door. She opens the door. And it's a woman, maybe 40-something. She's got 4 or 5 different colors in her hair. She has ear piercings everywhere but her eyeballs, and tattoos. And so she come in. Oh, by the way, I'm hitting the face with a big plume of marijuana smoke. Not that I would know what that would smell like. Mm-hmm. I've just read it in books. And so she's working on my back. And she's playing Motown music, which is my favorite genre of popular music. And every time a song came on, I would talk about who wrote it, who sang it, maybe a backstory of the singer. And another song would come on, I would do the same thing. Virtually every song she played, I knew something about the backstory. And then maybe half hour into the session, she says, "I know who you are. I knew who you were when you called and made your appointment. You're Larry Elder, you ran for governor." And she said, "I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't vote for you. But had I known you were this personable and this funny, I would have voted for you." I said, do you know any Republicans? She said, no. I said, you don't know a single one? She said, no. I said, well, believe it or not, we have personalities. We have senses of humor.
We're good people, too.
Unbelievable. And this is not in the book, this just happened the other day. I'm leaving my dentist's office. He's on the 5th floor of a building. And I hit the elevator to go down to the 1st floor. And not paying any attention because it normally wouldn't stop. It stops. I started walking off. And it was the 2nd floor, not the 1st floor. And I almost literally ran over this woman. She was a little person, maybe a little more than 4 feet tall, roughly 50 years old. And I apologized profusely for almost knocking her over. And we go to the 2nd floor, and she looks up. She goes, I know who you are. You're Larry Elder. You ran for governor. And I smiled, and I said, did you vote for me? She said, no. And as we got off, we continued our conversation. I said, why didn't you vote for me? She said, because you're a Republican. I said, you would never vote for any Republican? She said, well, I wouldn't say any Republican. I smiled. I said, oh, just not this one. She said, well, I would vote for Ronald Reagan. And my dad, she said, was a big fan of Ronald Reagan. I would vote for him. I said, tell me the difference. And she said, I would never vote for Trump. Tell me the difference between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump in terms of policies. And she paused, and then she said, well, Trump is an a-hole, except she didn't say a. And I said, so, inflation low, gas prices low, borders secured, no new wars. Our enemies feared us, our friends respected us, and you wouldn't vote for him because he's an a-hole? And she said, well, I have a handicap. And Donald Trump mocked a disabled reporter. And we spent the next 2 minutes, and I explained to her he did not mock a disabled reporter. The reporter in question is named Serge Kovaleski, I told her. He has an atrophied arm. He doesn't gyrate the way Donald Trump did when he was teasing him or mocking him, as you put it, during a town hall or rally. Donald Trump, shortly after he got elected, Julie, said that during 9/11, there were people in New Jersey who were cheering as the towers fell. And nobody for a moment could figure out any kind of confirmation of what Donald Trump said, because Donald Trump is Donald Trump, so every time he opens his mouth, they fact check him. And Donald Trump produced an article written by a guy named Serge Kovaleski, co-written by him, I think it was the Washington Post, where he said that some people observed people cheering as the Twin Towers fell. And then people went to the reporter to talk about the story. And he said, well, I wasn't sure that it happened. I was quoting other people. I never personally saw it. So Donald Trump, in a rally, Julie, began teasing him. He said, I don't remember. I'm not sure I saw it. I was telling her this. And I said that Kovaleski himself never even accused Trump of mocking him. Other people did on his behalf. He never did that. Donald Trump was teasing his retreat from the story. Whether you believe he should have teased him or not, he wasn't mocking his disability. And she said, you know, you're making me think. And she said, and I'm Jewish. And I have to tell you, I don't like the way they are pressuring Bibi Netanyahu to engage in a ceasefire without releasing the hostages. I said, well, you must be aware that Donald Trump is perceived by most Israelis to be the most pro-Israel president in Israel's history. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He cut off the funding of the Palestinians because he said they were anti-peace. He did not feel that when Israel defended itself, it was our role to tell them to restrain. He did the Abraham Accords, and she said yes, and his daughter married a Jew. I said, not just a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, and she converted. And she said, you know, I wish I had known all of this before the election, the recall election. I would have voted for you. You're cute. And I said, you're cute too. May I take a selfie with you? She said yes. We took the picture, and then she said this. Thank you for asking permission before you took the picture. I said, why wouldn't I? She said, you'll be surprised how many people see me walking down the street because of my size. They take out their phones, they take a picture of me like I'm an exhibit in a circus. I said, well, they're a-holes.
You know, everybody watching has people like this in their lives. You know, when those individuals hear the word Republican, they have this Pavlovian knee-jerk disgust, and they won't even consider what you're saying. And, you know, recently on this show, Larry, I did a segment on Yuri Bezmenov, who was the KGB operative in the Soviet Union and defected to Canada. And he exposed the 4 steps of ideological subversion that the Soviet Union had mapped out to undermine the United States. Mm-hmm. And one of them that I especially highlighted was demoralization. And what Yuri said was that they endeavored for demoralization, not just in the sense of making Americans jaded, although, of course, we certainly are. Mm-hmm. But he meant demoralization as in literally demoralizing our population, erasing the distinctions between good and evil and right and wrong. And he has this great quote where he's like, what they tried to do is make Americans so confused that despite an abundance of information, they cannot make logical decisions about themselves, about their family members. And when I see people like the many who you described, I think about how amazingly successful that psychological warfare by our enemies, and frankly domestically, not just by international people, but within our own country, they have been so staggeringly successful at smearing Republicans and conservatives. And you also write in your book, and I remember this when you were running for governor. I voted for you, by the way.
You better.
Yeah, that would have been a problem.
Otherwise, this interview's over.
I know, if I had him on the show and didn't vote for him. But I remember very clearly that Governor Newsom did not defend his record. He didn't say, you should vote for me because I'm a great governor. He enlisted President Obama, President Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, among others, to say, stop the Republican takeover. That was revelatory. They were trying to, dog whistle. Oh, Larry Elder's a Republican. Mm-hmm. Don't vote for him. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
You've said a lot. Let me respond to some of the things. Regarding Yuri Bezmenov, I have a little show that I do online. It's pinned to the top of my Twitter feed, and it's also on wherever you get podcasts. And just last week, I talked about Yuri Bezmenov and the 4 stages. Also, I was the executive producer of a couple of films called Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2. And the same people who helped me with Uncle Tom 1 and Uncle Tom 2 are doing a film called Yuri about Bezmenov. It's coming out pretty soon. But you're right about Gavin Newsom. All these surrogates who came out here to campaign on his behalf, including Joe Biden, all said the same thing. Stop the Republican takeover. If you saw the ads on TV, and they were inundated with ads, I got outspent 10-1. I had taken one picture of Donald Trump in my life at that point, and it was during the 2016 election. Both of us were side by side with our thumbs up. I saw that picture over and over and over again. Even though Donald Trump never endorsed me, his people reached out, and I said, I want to keep this California centric, because what they're going to do, which what they always do, is turn this into a referendum against you. And so he never endorsed me. Nevertheless, they showed a picture of the two of us side by side as if he was endorsing me. And they said, not Gavin Newsom doing a great job on the way he shut down the state because of COVID, a great job on crime, a great job on our public schools, which were ranked near the last, a great job on retaining our population, as I mentioned earlier. We've lost 1 million people in 3 years, doing a great job on homelessness, great job on fire management, water management. Stop Republican takeover, what they said over and over and over again. And based on the conversation I had with the 2 women in the restaurant, the masseuse, and the one lady I mentioned in the elevator, that's all they needed to say. Because they have been indoctrinated into believing that no matter how bad things are, dastardly, knuckle-dragging, smelly old Republicans will make things worse. And it worked here in California.
Do you see this woke coalition falling apart? I have my own theories about how that may happen, but do you think that those individuals, like the ones that you encountered in the restaurant, is there any chance of them waking up?
I think that sooner or later, things get so bad, almost like you're a drug addict. You're almost like a drug addict, and you hit rock bottom, and then you have to rethink. I think the captain of the Titanic, Julie, had he known iceberg was ahead, would have taken evasive action. It's your job, it's my job, to inform people like that iceberg is ahead. Mm-hmm. So I think sooner or later, crime is going to get so bad, and homelessness so bad, and the cost of living so bad, that even people like that are going to have to wake up. And we're seeing some signs of it. If you look at the polls, Barack Obama got 4% of the black vote in 2000. Republican got 4% of the black vote in 2008 when Barack Obama ran the first time. The second time, Republicans got 6%. When Donald Trump ran in 2016, he got 8%. When he ran for re-election in 2020, he got 12%. And right now the polls show about 30% or so of blacks would consider voting Republican. Why? The economy, inflation, gas prices, things like that hurt people at the bottom more than anybody else. And the average family of four now is spending about $1,000 or more for the same goods and services that they spent 3 years ago. Also the borders. Donald Trump gave us the most secure border in our history. The reason I say that is not because I'm repeating his rhetoric. I was in a hotel a few months ago, and there were a bunch of Border Patrol agents staying there. And I went up to maybe 10 of them, and I said, Donald Trump says, quote, when I was president, the borders were the most secure in our history. Is that true? And they all said, well, I can't say history because I've only been here 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 14 years, whatever. I can tell you in my tenure as a Border Patrol agent, the borders were never more secure than they were under Donald Trump. There was a civil rights report a few years ago that found because of the presence of illegal alien labor, there are about 1 million black people who don't have jobs, who are not working because of the presence of illegal alien labor. And the presence of illegal alien labor puts downward pressure to the tune of almost $2,000 per year on the salaries of black people and brown people living in the inner city. So the people who are hurt most by illegal aliens are the very people that the Democratic Party, black and brown people, they purport to support. So I think that we're seeing something happening. Not fast enough, and certainly in California, not quick enough for me, but I think that common sense ultimately prevails.
Mm-hmm. I think also, I totally agree with you that things, sadly, will probably get so bad that people are forced to wake up. But I also think, especially in a post-October 7th world, a lot of people are waking up to the internal contradictions of wokeism.
Right.
It is not based on principles. It's based on group identity. And we see that, for instance, on the one hand, they say, we protect and amplify the voices of women. But then they say there's no such thing as a woman. Mm-hmm. They go, me too, me too, me too, believe all women, but not Israeli women if when they say that they've been raped. They say if you are non-white and non-Christian, you should think of yourself in terms of your group identity. But if you're white and you're Christian, you're forbidden from thinking of yourself in terms of group identity. So I think people, as time goes on, are starting to see these contradictions, and the factions are kind of turning in on themselves.
I think so. I'm old school. I used to get the LA Times and the New York Times thrown at my house.
I still get both of them to my house.
And after Barack Obama got elected in 2008, I get up in the morning, I bend down, look at the papers. And on the front page of both these newspapers were color pictures of parents, black parents, holding their kids, crying, and saying, now, for the first time, I can sincerely tell my son, I can sincerely tell my daughter that they can grow up and be whatever they want to be. And fast forward, it's now as if it never even happened. Weren't you just crying in 2008 saying, okay, hallelujah, it's done? MLK's dream of people evaluating you based on content of character rather than color of skin has been achieved to the extent that it's practical. In 1964, Martin Luther King was being interviewed by British television. And this is shortly after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of '64. And King said, changes have happened so rapidly in America in the last couple of years, why, I'm amazed. And I think in about 40 years' time, there could be a black president. Do the math, almost on cue, 2008, Barack Obama gets elected. And the reason I mention this, Julie, is because he didn't say in 40 years' time there'll be black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and there have been many. Mm-hmm. He didn't say there are going to be black governors, including the governor of Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, and there was. He didn't say there are going to be black mayors, and right now, as you and I are speaking, the mayors of the three biggest cities in America, LA, Chicago, New York, all have black mayors, even though their populations are not 50% black. He didn't say that there'll be black sports billionaires, Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, LeBron James. These are billionaires. He didn't say that the president of the American Bar Association will be black, and that there have been two of them. He didn't say the president of the American Medical Association is going to be black, and there have been two of them. He didn't say there are going to be two black coaches squaring off in the Super Bowl, and it happened. He didn't say the coach of arguably the most storied college football team, Notre Dame, would be black, and there was. He said president. So
And
this happened, and now it's as if it didn't happen. You have all this DEI crap and microaggressions crap, and the same kind of race card hustling that preceded Barack Obama's election is still going on right now. When this is the fairest, most free country that's ever existed, black people can go from nothing to something faster in America than any other country in human history. Right now, as you and I are speaking, Haitians are lining up for a lottery to get into America. And the same people born and raised here are bitching and moaning and whining about how racist and sexist and racist it is. It's outrageous. And it's hurting the very people that people like that purport to care about.
Those individuals, they scorn the steps by which they did ascend.
Mm-hmm.
They are the beneficiaries of the American system,
right.
And they use their privilege, and that's a word that's thrown around a lot, privilege, to try to undermine that system. Look, I mean, I am as big of a fan as America as you can get, as I know you are, but even despite the fact that right now we are still by far and away the best country as far as opportunity, tolerance, equality to exist in the world, that is quickly dwindling. And you write in your book, Larry, I have this quote right here. For nearly 30 years, I have made the case that for Black people in California and the entire nation, the American dream is available to everyone. You only have to work for it. I believe that is true. However, right now, as I said, things are so bad that it seems it's becoming less true, where everyday people who work hard, they're law-abiding, they save their money, they're really struggling. I was just reading that Vanguard said that they have a record number of account holders who are dipping into their 401ks in order to avert a financial catastrophe. Mm-hmm. What can we do to solve this, to really get back to an America where the American dream is still possible?
I was watching a interview with the then heads of the RNC and the DNC. I think it was the lady from Florida, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Reince Priebus.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at home watching this, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz said, "I want a government that has my back." And I was praying that Reince Priebus would say, "I want a government that gets off my back." And that's what's going on here. As I was driving over here for our interview, Julie, I'm listening to an old interview that I did when I was at KBC 790. So we're talking about maybe a 15-year-old interview. I'd completely forgotten about it. For some reason, it popped up on my in my phone when I was driving. And I said, and it was an interview with a fact checker who had fact checked me for something I said when I was on CNN. Remember the old days when they used to invite you on CNN? I was on Crossfire.
I don't remember those days. I was
on Crossfire, and on Crossfire I said, in 1900, at all three levels, government took less than 10% from the American people.
Wow.
Now it takes around 35%, I said. And if you add the cost of so-called mandates, government takes almost 50% out of every dollar that we produce. So I got a phone call from a fact checker, and they were gobsmacked at the idea that in 1900, at all three levels, federal, state, and local government took less than 10%. And now it takes 35%. And if you add the cost of mandates, as when you're running a factory, the government mandates you have to buy something you don't think you need to buy, it's 50%. The fact checker, I gave them sources for everything. What's your source? I gave them sources for everything. And so they did an article, and they put a little meter and said Larry Elder was half true. That's what the whole interview was about. They said I was right in 1900. They found out that government took less than 9% for the American, less than 10% for the American people. They said I was right, that right now it takes about 35%. Notice how I did that? And they said that it's questionable about the third point that I made. And he agreed that I was right. And I said, let me ask you something. You just fact-checked a guy named Ed Schultz, and you gave him mostly true. I made 3 points, 2 of which you said were right. How do I get mostly false? It seemed to me it should have been 2/3 right. And so we went back and forth. The reason I'm telling you all of this is, as I discuss in my book, my father never knew his biological father. 8th grade dropout. He ended up becoming a Pullman porter in the trains. Pearl Harbor, he joined the Marines, became a Marine, staff sergeant in the Marines, in charge of cooking. The military was segregated in those days. He leaves when the war is over, goes back to Chattanooga where he met and married my mom. There's a point to this story where he met and married my mom and tried to get a job as a short order cook, and he was told, we don't hire N-words. He said to my mom, I'm going to LA where I was before the war when I was a Pullman porter. I'm going to get me a job as a cook. He comes out to LA, walks around, and he's told, you don't have any references. My dad said, I need references to make ham and eggs. So he goes to an unemployment office, this time just one door, and she says, I have nothing. My dad says, what time do you open? She says, 9. What time do you close? He said, 5. And he said, I'll be sitting in that chair till you find something. So my dad sat for a whole day, came back the next day. She called him up during lunchtime and said, I have something. I'm not sure you're going to want it. My dad said, of course I'm going to want it. What is it? She said, it's a job cleaning toilets at Nabisco brand bread. My dad did that for over 10 years, took a second full-time job cleaning toilets, cooked for a family on the weekend to make additional money because he wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom, and went to night school to get his GED. After that, he went to night school to learn how to operate a small restaurant. Starts a small restaurant at the age of 47, runs it until his mid-80s. When my dad retired, he owned that property, the property next door, plus the little house that's still in our family. He was almost a millionaire. My dad was able to buy a home in California working 2 full-time jobs as a janitor. You probably work 4 or 5 full-time jobs as a janitor today in California and not be able to buy a house because the average price of a home in California is twice that of the national average. My point is, government has burdened people with taxes and regulations now so that things cost way more than they used to cost. And that is one of the reasons why people feel like they're falling behind. You fast forward with Joe Biden spending trillions of dollars paying people not to work, his war on oil and gas, which has caused gas prices to be 50% higher than they were when Donald Trump was in office. And this is why, as I said earlier, the average family of 4 is paying over $1,000 a month for the same goods and services that they bought 3 or 4 years ago. Government is doing this. This is human-made disaster. This is not something that we can't figure out how to solve. You need to get government off people's back, and you need to reduce the size of spending. One of the reasons I ran for president is that both sides sometimes talk about spending. Their side doesn't really care. Our side purports to care. And anytime anybody even suggests modifying Social Security, Medicaid, or Medicare, the other side accuses you of not caring about the poor, the sick, the elderly, and they back off. As a result, nothing really happens to the so-called entitlements programs that are one of the big drivers of our debt and our deficit. We need an amendment to the Constitution to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP, with exceptions perhaps for war and for natural disaster. Otherwise, government will not get down to the size the Founding Fathers intended. When the Constitution was drafted, Article 1, Section 8 limited the duties and responsibilities of federal government, a handful of things. Social Security was not one of them. Medicare was not one of them. Medicaid was not one of them. However you feel about social programs, they were not in the Constitution. And we know that because there was no ability to tax. The Constitution had to be amended for the income tax to pay for all these things. The Founding Fathers intended for these kinds of things to be handled by the states and state level. So government is way bigger than the Founding Fathers intended. As a result, when we have a GDP growth of 3%, it's hallelujah. We used to grow 6%, 7%. People used to be wealthier twice as fast as they are right now. And that is what's going on in this country. If the government got off the backs of people, we'd be more prosperous. People would be happier. They'd have more money. They'd have more ability to pay for their own kids' education, take vacations, all the kinds of things that we could do with our money if we kept more of it in our own pockets.
And if big government has been the great success that many purport that it is, let's look at the facts. And this is what I learned from your book. You just throw out all of these facts whenever you speak, and it's no different when you write. We should tally them up. It's literally probably in the thousands in that book. The Cato Institute ranks California 48th out of 50 in personal and economic freedom.
Right.
I also learned from your book that nearly a third of Californians live on or near the poverty line. 75% of Black boys in this state cannot read at grade levels. I mean, the list goes on. You talked about how Governor Newsom granted early release during COVID of 8,000 felons and how much crime has gone up. Homelessness has gone up. You have this devastating quote in your book. You say, quote, "Cops tell me 100% of female homeless have been raped. The only question is how many times.
That's right.
So again, if this has been such a success, let's look right here at the data. The data indicates the exact opposite. I want to ask you, Larry, about this incident that I remember when you were running
in Venice,
and you profile in your book about a gun pellet attack. What happened there?
Well, that was before the Venice thing. 45 minutes before that, I'm doing a press conference on the corner of a street not too far from downtown. A car very slowly drives by and shoots at us. It turned out they weren't bullets; they were pellets. But one of them went through a folder that one of my security guys was holding. Another one shot somebody in the behind. It could have put out somebody's eye, and we didn't say anything about it because we didn't want there to be any copycats. So 45 minutes later, I'm in Venice at a homeless encampment, and you might remember this: a woman wearing a gorilla mask, a white woman wearing a gorilla mask, based on the color of her hands, threw an egg at me. Glancing blow, didn't quite hit me, but it glanced off my head. And the newspapers, LA Times, basically made a joke out of it. And the sheriff of LA County, Villanueva, said that this was a hate crime, even though he's not a Republican, and said that had this happened to Barack Obama or Kamala Harris, people would be outraged. But because it's elder, they laughed. And the woman, as I said, was wearing a gorilla mask, white woman wearing a gorilla mask. And when people asked me about it, they kept saying, there was a white woman wearing a gorilla mask. There was a white woman wearing a gorilla mask. And finally I said, how do you know it was a mask? Maybe she was having a bad hair day. And then the headline was, Elder makes sexist comment about the person that attacked him. So you can't win.
Well, I learned from your book that the LA Times, is this the one, Elder involved in altercation in Venice?
Yeah. And
yes.
And the picture there looks as if I'm slapping somebody, happened to be a supporter, the daughter of, her name is Soledad Ursula, and she is a supporter of mine. And I was greeting her, but the way they froze the picture, it would looks as if I was slapping her, and the headline said, Elder involved in altercation. A lot of people just read headlines and look at pictures. If you just read the headline and saw the picture, you would have assumed the altercation is me slapping somebody. So Soledad Ursula contacted the LA Times. She was furious, and they removed the headline so that it didn't look like I was slapping her. But they didn't really change the whole thing. This is the kind of bias that I ran against when I was when I was running for governor. And speaking of the bias, on YouTube, there is maybe a half hour, 45-minute interview that I did with many members of the editorial board of the LA Times. For the first 5 minutes, I just urge people to check it out and just sit back, get some popcorn, and enjoy it, because I teed off on them. I said, before we get started, there were two of them I believe I spoke with. Please explain to me what makes me the black face of white supremacy, as I was described by one of your columnists, Erica D. Smith. Well, we don't really get into what the columnists say. I said, so it's okay with you that I, Larry Elder, have been referred to as the black face of white supremacy. Well, I said, do you think it's fair for me to be called that? What's the justification? And for 5 minutes, they just danced around and danced around and danced around. I could tell no one had ever challenged them the way I had. But that's the kind of nonsense I put up with. Both the LA Times and the Sacramento Bee, two of the arguably the most influential newspapers in this state, both supported Gavin Newsom, and they editorialized against the recall, claiming that it was anti-democratic, even though it's part of our Constitution. And how, when you are interviewing somebody, when your editorial board already endorses your opponent and already says there shouldn't be a recall, how is the interview going to be fair? And it wasn't.
Speaking of some other challenges that you faced, not just in the gubernatorial race, but in your presidential race, what happened with regard to the RNC?
Why didn't I make that first debate?
Yes. And you were there in Minneapolis.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember.
It was in Milwaukee, and you had to get 40,000 individual donors, which I did, and you had to be at 1% or better in 3 or more polls. So on the day of the deadline, we submitted 3 polls. I was at 1%, 40,000 or more donors. I get a phone call from Ronna McDaniel and David Bossie, the debate czar. They're both on the line. Larry, I'm sorry, you're not eligible for that debate. I said, why? One of your polls is affiliated with Donald Trump and therefore cannot be used. Our rules stipulate that any poll that's affiliated with any candidate cannot be used by any other candidate, including the one that hired the pollster.
The Rasmussen poll?
And it was Rasmussen. And after she made this statement, within hours, Rasmussen put out a statement on YouTube, on Twitter, and said, we're not affiliated with Donald Trump. There's no reason why Larry Elder can't use us. So then we submitted a fourth poll where I was at 1% or better. And Ronna McDaniel said, well, you submitted it too late. Well, of course I submitted it too late. I didn't realize the first three were ineligible. And so I hired a lawyer. My lawyer was a former chair of the Federal Election Commission. And he said, by failing to apply the debate criteria to you, what the RNC is doing, if they allow this to go through, would be to give a 2-hour in-kind contribution to the 8 politicians who made it on the debate stage based on the value of the time for Fox News. They could be liable for $100 million if they don't put you up there. So I issued a statement, and I told Ronna McDaniel and the RNC, if you do not allow me on that debate stage, by 2 o'clock today, I was in Milwaukee when the statement was issued, I'm going to file a complaint with the FEC. They could subject the RNC to a fine of $100 million. I thought they would blink. They didn't. Tick, tick, tick. It was like High Noon, the movie, and they still didn't let me up there, as you know, and so we filed a complaint, and the complaint is still in process. I have no idea how long it'll take for them to go through the complaint, but often it takes years, but we did file that complaint. So there's no love lost between Ronna McDaniel and me. She, as you know, was hired briefly by MSNBC.
Briefly. She's out now.
And she got fired after 4 or 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing about that, by the way. I write a weekly column, and I just wrote one about this whole thing with Ronna McDaniel and MSNBC. I didn't mention what happened between the two of us, but I did say how incredible it is that MSNBC, the inmates, the various hosts, revolted because they hired her. She's an election denier. And she had a very tough interview with Kirsten Welker, Ronna McDaniel did, where she was asked about her comments about supporting Trump's allegation that 2020 was stolen and so forth. Meanwhile, down the hall at MSNBC is another host, longtime host named Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton is America's preeminent race card hustler. He was involved in what one Jewish leader in New York called the most serious pogrom in the history of this country. It's called Crown Heights, where he said, Al Sharpton, if the Jews want to pin their yarmulkes on their heads and come over to my house and get it on, let them do it. He referred to whites moving into Harlem as interlopers. He was involved in a scandal called the Freddy's Fashion Mart, where because of his rhetoric, somebody got so angry he went into a fashion store, pulled out a gun, and killed a bunch of people and set the whole place on fire. Al Sharpton was in the streets of Ferguson yelling, "No justice, no peace," before one word of testimony had been taken, and as you know, the officer was completely vindicated. And Al Sharpton has a show on MSNBC. He's also, wait for it, an election denier, something that they accused Ronna McDaniel of being. After Donald Trump got elected in 2016, Al Sharpton said there's no question that Donald Trump is illegitimate and began talking about what he thought were instances of voter suppression. So Al Sharpton is the very same thing that MSNBC purports to hate, which are election deniers, yet he has a show on MSNBC. It's just absolutely incredible that they can do this with a straight face.
Mm. Are you going to run for president again?
Julie, I've run for 3 offices. I ran for 3rd grade class president. I ran for governor. I ran for president. I won 1 out of 3. So if I were a baseball player, I'd be batting .333, and that would put me in the Hall of Fame.
Well, President Biden ran, 3 times?
He sure did. No, I think I've given at the office. It's hard. It's grueling. It's a huge financial sacrifice. It's draining on you physically. It's draining on you emotionally. And if you're a conservative, you'll be mistreated by the media. I would not trade the runs for the world. I really enjoyed running for governor, enjoyed meeting all the people, and just kind of rediscovering what a great state this potentially is. And going into Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada and talking to regular people, it was great. Someone once asked me, did you experience any racism? Sorry. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm walking into a restaurant in Iowa. Everybody there is white, and I'm sitting there and I'm holding court, and they're asking me questions respectfully. I go to a venue in New Hampshire. Virtually everybody is white, and they ask me questions, and they treat me respectfully. I did not have a single negative thing happen to me other than with the black media.
Well, when Erica Smith calls you the black face of white supremacy, do you see that as left-wing anti-black racism, or do you see that as just left-wing anti-conservatism?
I think it's both. For example, Benny Thompson is the chair of the so-called Insurrection Committee. He once referred to Clarence Thomas as an Uncle Tom. And to her credit, Dana Bash of CNN asked him about it. And she said, well, if a white person were to call Clarence Thomas an Uncle Tom, wouldn't that be racism? And Benny Thompson said, you're not black. Meaning, no-fly zone over calling Clarence Thomas and Larry Elder Uncle Toms if you're black. But if you're white, then that's a problem. Wrap your arms around that. Why is that acceptable?
It's ridiculous. I want to ask you about the 2024 race, which is rapidly approaching.
Right.
I'm appreciating a little bit of the calm right now before it gets really intense. You know, we hear every election cycle, Larry, that this is the most important election, of our lifetime.
Right.
I've got a little bit of a different view that I'm considering. Maybe this election isn't as important as people think it is, and let me explain. Obviously, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, barring some, unforeseen circumstance. Absolutely going to vote for Donald Trump. Absolutely going to do whatever I can to prevent a second Joe Biden presidential term. However, the thing that I keep thinking about, Larry, is that things are so bad and so many of our systems are hopelessly corrupt that even if Donald Trump wins in 2024, there is so much to unravel that one might say that, that there really needs to be more long-term plans than just this 2024 election. For instance, we have 7 million illegal immigrants in this country, nearly every single school. And on this show, I go through Department of Education codes from various states. They are just littered with DEI, gender confusion, racial confusion. Our national debt is at $35 trillion. We've got China encroaching on Taiwan, Putin in Ukraine, Israel, Gaza. Things are not great.
Right.
So is this election as hugely important and a turning point in our country as people say it is?
I think it is for all the reasons you just now mentioned. No, I agree with you. Every 4 years, this is the most important election ever. I hear that all the time. When have we had, by the time Biden leaves, assuming he leaves, when have we had almost 10 or 11 million illegal aliens coming in the country over a period of 4 years? None of whom have been vetted. Some of them are on our terror watch list. We have no idea what they're doing, who they are. When has that ever happened? When have we had a president who literally went to war against oil and gas the way Joe Biden did? So that at one time, gas prices were twice what they were under Donald Trump. Now they're about 50% higher than what they were under Donald Trump. When have we had a president who, after the Supreme Court said you cannot do this student debt forgiveness, do it anyway, as Joe Biden is doing? When have we seen somebody pull out of the way Biden did from Afghanistan, ignoring the advice of his generals, claiming that no one told him that the Taliban would come back and the Afghan government would collapse? And 2 generals testified under oath, that's exactly what we told him. So Joe Biden does it and then publicly lies and says nobody advised him, leaving behind billions of dollars of military equipment, not advising our allies, causing 13 service members to be killed, leaving behind hundreds of Afghan collaborators and Americans. And when has it ever happened? When have we had this infusion of DEI all over the place after, as I mentioned earlier, I thought that the notion that America was systemically racist was done after Barack Obama got elected? When have we seen this? I've never seen anything like this. So I think America's at a tipping point. And if Donald Trump does not get back in the office, we continue to have open borders. We continue to have money being spent, deficit and debt growing the way it's grown. And the idea that you've got people in the Supreme Court who can't define what a woman is. I think we're at an inflection point, and I think this is critical. So I do believe this is probably the most consequential election of my lifetime.
You and I totally agree that Donald Trump has to be elected. We cannot have a second Joe Biden term. I think the point that I'm trying to raise, though, is that the problems that we have now are going to take a lot longer than just one term to unravel. And I worry, what's going to happen when Donald Trump is gone? Mm-hmm. What's going to happen in 2028? I mean, right. For instance, the national debt, that's not just, one president makes that go away. Right. People on the Supreme Court who can't define a woman. One president... I'm doing what Dennis does. I'm knocking the mic. They call me a Dennis Prager protege. This is the main way I'm a Dennis Prager protege. He does it like 5 times an hour on the radio show. But, so much of the rot that is entrenched, even if Donald Trump is elected, it will take decades to unravel. Do you take my point? What are we going to do long term to reverse this?
Well, one of the reasons I proposed an amendment to the Constitution for spending to be a certain percentage of the GDP is because of this. It takes a long time to amend the Constitution, but it happens every 10 years or so on average. It's a long conversation. America is a big ship. Big ships take a long time to turn around. But Donald Trump was able to give us a secure border within his term. He was able to dramatically cut regulations, which is why the economy did so well. So things can happen over a fairly short period of time. And that's why I also think that his choice of VP will be one of the more consequential decisions he'll make.
Generally, who do you think it will be?
I have no idea. I really don't. I can tell you who it won't be. It won't be Mike Pence.
Oh, that's the truth.
I think if I were Donald Trump, I would choose somebody black because I believe that there are more gettable black votes and there are gettable female votes in the suburbs, which is what some people think he'll do. He'll put a woman in order to presumably attract more female voters. I think he'll potentially attract more black voters than female voters if he had somebody like Byron Donalds. I'm very impressed by him. Some people suggest Tim Scott. I don't want to diss Tim Scott. I met him on the campaign trail, but I'm much more impressed with Byron Donalds. I think he's a smart guy. He's a fighter. He's bright. And he's got a commanding presence. He's articulate. I would like Donald Trump to choose somebody like that. And I think that would be a smart move because I believe that the percentage of black people who are now becoming increasingly fed up with the Democratic Party is growing, and Donald Trump should tap into that.
What about Vivek Ramaswamy or Tulsi Gabbard? What are your thoughts on those
Tulsi
two?
Gabbard, I just talked with her recently. She's still an independent. She's not really a conservative Republican, in my opinion. And Vivek, I think, is too young. I like him. I think he's enthusiastic, has a lot of good ideas. I just think he's too young. But Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He's going to make his decision. I believe that the old line that whoever he chooses should be somebody who's be ready to assume the office on day one is still something that I would hope that he would think about. By the way, some people speculate that Gavin Newsom is somehow, some way going to be the nominee for the Democrats, and that Joe Biden is so unpopular and Kamala Harris is so unpopular, they need to get somebody else like Gavin Newsom. As I explained in my book, that is not going to happen for a number of reasons. First part, the reason Democrats moved up the primary from New Hampshire to South Carolina is because 60% of the Democrat voters in the primary are black. Most of those are black female. And they wanted to reward blacks for their loyalty by giving blacks a greater say in who the nominee is. The reason Kamala Harris is on the ticket is because she's a black female. When James Clyburn, on the eve of the South Carolina primary in 2020, endorsed Joe Biden, whose candidacy was going nowhere, this is after Bernie Sanders won the Nevada caucuses and for a few days became the party's frontrunner. A self-described Democrat socialist was a Democrat Party frontrunner, and they were scared bleepless. So then Clyburn endorsed Biden and extracted a promise from Biden that if Biden got elected president, his first Supreme Court nominee would be a black female. His running mate was a black female. Out here in California, as you know, when it was clear that Dianne Feinstein was not likely going to be able to finish her term, Gavin Newsom said he was going to appoint a black female, and did so. If Kamala Harris, who's right now on deck, to use a baseball expression, and recently said she's ready to take over in the event that she's called to do it.
Lord help us.
If she is drop kicked for some white dude like Gavin Newsom or Mayor Pete, black voters, particularly female voters, will be livid.
What about Michelle Obama?
Not so livid that they won't vote. They won't that they'll vote Republican, but so livid they won't vote at all. The only way you swap out a Kamala Harris is if it's a Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey, neither of whom wants a job, and if Kamala Harris is willing to go. What makes you think she's willing to go? She has an ego. She ran for president. She dropped out for the first primary, but she ran for president, and she's never lost an election. She ran for DA in San Francisco. She won. She ran for AG out here in California, and she won. She ran for re-election, AG, and she won. She ran for U.S. Senate, and she won. And she won on the ticket with Joe Biden. She's never lost an election. And believe me, I read a lot of black media, and they believe that when we conservatives mock her so-called cackle, it is both sexist and racist. And they believe that she has been saddled with thankless tasks, such as getting to the root cause of illegal immigration, when everybody knows the root cause of illegal immigration is Joe Biden. So the black media feels she's been treated unfairly, and if she is dislodged, as I said earlier, for a white person, the Democratic Party will have hell to pay, which is why Gavin Newsom is not announced. Why wouldn't you announce if you're Gavin Newsom to run for president? Biden's popularity is in the toilet. He's down on every issue other than abortion and maybe climate change. And Gavin Newsom desperately wants to be president. Why do you suppose he hasn't announced? Because he knows exactly what I just now told you. He does not want to be on the wrong end of getting rid of the black female who's on the brink of becoming the first female president of the United States.
You're absolutely right that both President Biden and Vice President Harris are incredibly stubborn and are not going to willingly give up their positions. However, as you very well know, the Democratic Party has a huge problem on their hands, where 85% of Americans think that President Biden is too old to serve. Kamala Harris has a lower approval rating than Dick Cheney had, even at his lowest. And so do you still think that both of them will be on the ticket? You don't think that any Michelle Obama, Gavin Newsom...
They're stuck. They're stuck with her.
...trick is going to happen?
They're stuck with her for the reasons that I mentioned. Black voters will be livid, particularly black female voters, if she's drop-kicked. The other problem with Gavin Newsom is really one of policy. Think about it. 2/3 of the country believes we're on the wrong track economically. Why? Inflation, gas prices. Gavin Newsom is a more extremist on climate change than even Joe Biden. As you know, here in the state, he is... ban the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035. And California is a sanctuary state. Gavin Newsom has not said anything at all about the borders. He even praised Biden's pullout from Afghanistan. And so everything that you dislike about Joe Biden, every policy, Gavin Newsom would pour gasoline on it. He doesn't feel Joe Biden has spent enough. So there's nothing that Joe Biden has done that Gavin Newsom has criticized or offered a better alternative. So if you're somebody who believes we're on the wrong track, what makes you think this far left-wing California governor will put us on the right track?
Before we talk about your life, which I do want to spend a little bit of time on, because as I said, the book is just as much about your life as your gubernatorial race. But quickly, I do want to ask you about one of the most certainly talked about issues right now in our country, and that is the war in Gaza. We know that Israel has plans to enter Rafah in the coming days. Where do you see this going, both internationally and domestically?
Well, I think that Bibi Netanyahu is right. Hamas has to be destroyed. My concern is, then what? The problem is that Hamas is popularly supported by the Palestinians. What happened on October 7th is popularly supported by people living in Gaza. Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005. One of the candidates who ran was a woman who had 4 or 5 sons, 2 of whom were killed because they were homicide bombers. And she publicly said something to the effect of, I only wish I had had more sons to devote to jihad. She got elected. So I don't see any real distinction between the ideology of Hamas and the majority of Palestinians. So that's my concern. When the 15,000 or so Palestinian fighters are eliminated, and that's what Bibi Netanyahu's goal is, you still have not eliminated the culture. Kids are born and raised hating Jews, not just hating Jews in Israel, hating Jews anywhere and everywhere. And that's Hamas's goal, not just to destroy Israel, but to find and destroy Jews all over the country. How do you defeat that culture? This is a culture that's been endemic for since the beginning of the creation of the State of Israel. And anti-Semitism is an age-old phenomenon that's happened in a bunch of places, including the Middle East, including places like Spain with the Spanish Inquisition, in France with the Dreyfus affair. All sorts of instances of Jew hatred has gone on for millennia. So I don't know how you defeat that. My problem is the pressure that Joe Biden is putting on Netanyahu for a ceasefire without an agreement to return the 150 or so odd hostages, including 8 Americans, that Gaza still has held hostage. Israel is facing, to me, a more existential threat than it's faced since their creation. And what happened on October 7th is the most horrific thing that's happened to Jews since the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And how any right-thinking, moral person can feel that what Israel should do is anything other than what they're doing is beyond me. But Joe Biden is held to his left flank. People like Ilhan Omar and AOC, and he's afraid of losing Michigan because of the, I think, 200,000 Muslims who live there and will vote, so that he's now done something that presidents before him have not done, which basically is to turn his back on Israel. So I'm not pleased with what's going on. I think Bibi Netanyahu needs to finish the job, and then we'll hopefully see what happens. You can't have a two-state solution when one state wants you destroyed. Golda Meir, the former prime minister of Israel, put it best when she said something to the effect of, if the Palestinians lay down their arms, there would be peace. If we lay down our arms, there would be slaughter. And that's what's going on here. Until you change that equation, I don't know how you solve this.
You're absolutely right, and obviously the United States abstaining from that UN Security Council vote was, in my view, despicable.
It was.
Because President Biden is trying to play both sides. He's trying to act morally neutral here, but what he doesn't realize is that he's not being neutral. An indecision is a decision. So I agree with you. I will say, however, that as much as I and any moral person completely agrees with Israel's need to wipe out Hamas, it is unclear to me how this is going to work out long term for Israel. To your point, the population is so radicalized. Indeed, this invasion has, fomented so much anti-Israel, anti-Jew hatred. It was already there to begin with, but all around the world. And Israel's in an impossible situation, but I think it is worth noting, what is the long-term plan here? How is this going to work out?
Julie, when I was around your age, I was 21 years old, and I had my 21st birthday in Jerusalem.
Wow, that's a fun 21st birthday.
I had a big afro, and I was wearing an army jacket. My little brother was in the army. And I was walking through the old city, through the Palestinian section. And I'm walking, and I turn around, and I see about 5 or so Palestinian kids following me. They were just fascinated. And so I kept walking, and I stopped, turned around. There were 25 of them. I kept walking. I stopped. I turned around. There were about 50 kids just following me. So I stopped, and they all kind of surrounded me, and I held a press conference. One of them could speak English pretty well, and they asked me 3 questions. The first one was, do you know Angela Davis, the communist?
Yes.
Who was tried for murder and for kidnapping. She was acquitted. Black Panther. And I said, personally? And they said, yes. I said, no. And about a third of them left. Then they asked me if I knew Muhammad Ali. I said, personally? And they said, yes. I said, no. Another third left. Then they asked me if I knew karate, the martial art. And I said, no. And the rest of them left. Now, I told that story many times until 9/11. And people would laugh. After 9/11, I realized it wasn't funny, because this is all these kids knew about America. Angela Davis was a communist who made all sorts of anti-American comments, and the kids knew about her. Muhammad Ali renounced Christianity, became a Muslim, and of course he was heavyweight champ. They knew about him. And karate, because if you walk around the old city, on the walls you saw all these posters of martial arts movies that they imported from America. They didn't know Martin Luther King, didn't know about the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, Jefferson, They knew nothing at all about what America really stood for. They just knew Angela Davis, Muhammad Ali, and karate. This is all they know. This is all they're taught. If you look at the textbooks in the West Bank and in Gaza, they're replete with anti-Semitic tropes. This is what they're taught, what they know. Mm-hmm. And I remember having a conversation with a Palestinian who living in Israel, but he hated Israel. And he said, Israel's evil. And I said, does Israel have a bomb? And he said, yes. I said, why hasn't Israel used it? He said, well, because of public opinion, world public opinion. I said, I thought you just said Israel was evil. Evil doesn't care about public opinion. Why hasn't Israel used a bomb? Let me put it this way. If you guys had a bomb, would you use it on Israel? And he wouldn't answer the question.
Mm. Well, let's chat a bit about your life and your upbringing, although we're hearing about it here.
On that note.
On that happy note. But I'm jealous of your 21st birthday in Jerusalem. Yeah. I went to Israel 2 years ago, and it was one of the most life-changing, magnificent experiences of my life. And apropos of our book that we're in, Elevator Pitches for God, I really felt God's presence in that area. But let's talk about MyPillow for just a few seconds.
Okay.
Let's talk about something a little lighter than, Middle East peace. As you know, I use a lot of MyPillow products. I sleep on a MyPillow. I sleep on the Giza Dream bed sheets. I use my towels, and my favorite product ever is the My Slippers. And you can get all of these products at a discount too if you use the promo code Hartman or call 1-800-566-6745 for a limited time. You'll get those famous Giza Dream bed sheets, queen size for $59.98, king size for just $69.98. Those are the lowest prices in history. To get these specials, go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman, spelled with one N and no E, by the way. Again, Giza Dream bed sheets, queen size for $59.98, king size for just $69.98. You'll also get 60% off of the original My Slippers. I wear them everywhere, including the grocery store. They are so comfortable. Again, 1-800-566-6745 or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman. So Larry, I've been following you for some time, and I've known, some details about your life. For instance, I've listened to clips of when your mom was on your radio show, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I knew about your father's background, being a janitor, that you have two brothers. I'm so sorry for your loss, by the way. I know you most recently lost your brother, Kirk.
Yeah, I've lost both my brothers.
I know you
have. Dennis died almost 35 years ago. He was diabetic. And Kirk died on September 13, 2019.
So sorry.
2 weeks before his 70th birthday. My brother retired about 4 or 5 years earlier. He was a homebody, and my sister-in-law tried to get him to go on vacation. He wouldn't go. But finally, they agreed on his 70th birthday to go to Hawaii. They even had the tickets. And obviously that never happened because of that.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Mm-hmm. He was a great guy. Democrat, as was my mother.
My sister's a Democrat. We stay away from certain topics. But it was so interesting to read about your upbringing and the way that your parents inculcated a kind of strength and principle in you and rooted out this view of yourself as a victim. I want to ask you, what was the hardest period in your life?
Wow. I haven't had... probably when I started my company, I practiced law for a few years, and then I started a headhunting firm, placing lawyers with law firms and corporations. I did it for 14 years, and there were 2 or 3 times where things weren't going well, and I thought maybe I might not be able to succeed. But ultimately, the business worked fine. I was able to sell it, and I came out here and then went into TV and radio. That was probably the hardest time. The most time I grieved the most was when my mom died. My mom died at age 82. She was on my show every Friday for 1 hour. First, she was on for 15 minutes, and then people complained she wasn't on long enough. Then we doubled it to a half hour. People complained she wasn't on long enough. And then we made it an hour. So for about 10 years, she was on my show every Friday for 1 hour. It's probably the most popular segment of the show. And on that Friday, we probably had one of our best shows based upon just how it went. A lot of energy, great calls. And a woman named Tatiana called. and she was in a truck. And she's North Carolina driving. And she said, Larry, your mom is not just your mom. Your mom is America's mom. I just love listening to her every Friday. My mom was dead on Tuesday. She was diabetic, and she just went into a coma and never came out. My dad called in a panic and told me that she was in the hospital. I raced to go see her in the hospital. She's all plugged in with all these different tubes and stuff. And she didn't make it. She was at Vibrant on Friday, and then on Tuesday she was dead. And that was really, really difficult. My brother Kirk and I went to the place to get her a headstone. And Kirk said, what should we put on the headstone? I said, I got that. Viola Patricia Elder. I put her birthday, day she died, quote, America's mom, close quote. And she's buried right now at the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Hollywood. And that's what the headstone says. She and my dad taught my brothers and me that no one can make you feel inferior without your permission. And one day, Julie, I took a course called African American Literature. I never use the term African American to describe myself. That's just the name of the course. I'm just giving you truth in lending. And we read a poem by a guy named County Cullen. And it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. The class was all black. I went to Crenshaw High School, which was 95% black. Teacher was black, and she was angry at this poem, angry at the way this boy was treated. She said, he's always going to have a permanent scar in his psyche. He'll never feel part of the American family. He'll always think of himself as a second-class citizen. All the kids in the class were angry, and I even got a little angry. And so I'm walking home, and I knew my mother was going to have a different perspective on the poem. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew it would be different. So I walk in the house. She was stirring a big pot of greens and frying chicken wings, my favorite. I said, Mom, we read a poem in class, and I want to get your reaction to it. She said, sure, go ahead. What is it? I said, it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small. He was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mom took the spoon out of the pot, hit it on the side, and she said, Larry, what a darn shame he allowed something like that to spoil his vacation. How many wings do you want?
Wow.
And that is her attitude. My dad, as you know, I went through my life with my dad, with his background. My dad always told my brothers and me, hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you complain about what someone did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, my dad said this, no matter how hard you work, how good you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen to you. How you deal with those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man. My dad was a lifelong Republican. My mom was a lifelong Democrat. And the two of them would argue over the table. Nobody called anybody a fascist. Nobody called anybody a Nazi. Nobody says you only care about the rich. You don't care about the poor. They argued things civilly and respectfully. And my dad always said this about Democrats. Democrats want to give you something for nothing. When you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. And that's to your point earlier about the burden that government has placed on people. Government has burdened people to the point now where they're less successful than they otherwise would be if government got the hell out of the way.
What is something that you wish you knew when you were my age?
Wow. So much. One of my favorite questions is asking people something like that. What would you have done differently? It's another way of putting it. And virtually everybody I've asked that question to has a raft of things they would have done differently. The only person who's never said anything like I would have done things differently is my dad. And my dad is one of the most honest persons you know, so he wasn't BSing me. I asked my dad one time, Dad, if you could change anything, what would you change? My dad went, Larry, I feel like I made good decisions. I thought through what I was going to do, and I can't think of anything I would do differently. And if I were your age, if I was talking to myself, I would have made more prudent decisions with my investments. I would have made more prudent decisions with relationships that I was in. You and I were talking off the air, and I'm not going to tell people exactly what it was that you said.
That's okay.
What it was you said.
I'm an open book.
But essentially what you said, and you weren't being arrogant. I asked you if you were in a relationship, and you said you weren't. And you and I have talked about this before when I met you earlier. And essentially you said, basically you're waiting until you find somebody who's good enough. I think I spent a lot of time with people that weren't good enough. And I could have invested the energy in other things. So relationships I would have done differently. I would have made different investment decisions differently. But nothing major. Honestly, nothing major. I'm really happy with the fact that I decided to go to college, the college I chose, the law school I chose, going into law. I didn't want to be a lawyer and spend my life being a lawyer, but I enjoyed the practice. Starting a business gave me a lot of experience on what business people do, and going into talk radio and TV and commentary and writing. I've always considered myself to be a writer first. I used to get the New York Times Sunday paper delivered to my house, and I would go right away to the bestseller, and I would look at all the books in the best-selling list. I always wanted to be a published author. I never dreamed that I would be a New York Times bestseller, but I wanted to be a published author. And I am a New York Times bestselling author. I've had a couple of my books on the New York Times bestselling list. So I've had an extraordinary life. I mentioned to you that you mentioned the Hollywood star Walk of Fame. My older brother Kirk loved movies. I couldn't have cared less. And he would take my little brother and me down to the Hollywood Hall of Fame and point out all the stars there. How he knew who Fatty Arbuckle was, beyond me. How he knew who all these stars were, beyond me. But Kirk knew them all. I am now down there on that Walk of Fame. I mean, I couldn't have dreamt that. I was featured on 60 Minutes. I was featured on 2020. A few months ago, I was on the cover of Newsweek. As you pointed out, I'm on the wall in the Ronald Reagan Library. I mean, one time I saw Oprah Winfrey being interviewed by 60 Minutes right before her show, when her national show launched. And the interviewer, I think it was Morley Safer, said, "How do you see your future?" And she said, "My future is so bright it blinds my eyes." Well, my life, if somebody at your age had outlined to me the things I just now told you, it would have blinded my eyes. And I'm not done. I'm just 72 years old. I'll be 72 next month, and I still feel strong, vibrant. I've got lots of things I want to say and I want to do, and so it ain't over.
It certainly isn't. But congratulations, really, congratulations on, it's not over, but a life well lived so far, and especially the power of your example.
Well, and I want to congratulate you for taking your time and not wasting your time with people who don't deserve your time and your energy. I did not feel that way. I was just kind of going through and just rattling around and not really thinking it through as maturely as you have, and I think that's to be applauded.
Well, thank you. There are downsides to my approach too. You know, at times it can be a bit lonely, but if Larry Elder tells me I'm doing it right,
yes, you are.
I'm going to defer to that. Larry, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure. It went by so quickly.
I know it really did. I'm taking charge of the time, and my gosh, over an hour. As a reminder, everyone, his book is called As Goes California, My Mission to Rescue the Golden State and Save the Nation. And also, please do consider buying this book that both of us are in, called Elevator Pitches for God. It is absolutely magnificent, both of these books. I've read yours cover to cover. I'm working through this one. It's a great coffee table read. And also, check out Larry's podcast called Larry Elder, We've Got a Country to Save. There are 6 episodes out now, and it's fantastic. Larry, I look forward to welcoming you back on Timeless in the near future.
Julie, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. God bless.
And as a reminder, everyone, Timeless with Julie Hartman Live is Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. And be sure to catch Dennis and Julie, which is every Sunday at that same time. Thank you so much for being here. Take care.